Hello and welcome to the Parent Survival Kit podcast, from surviving to thriving in your household. My name is Gene Schwalen. Next to me, as always, my beautiful bride, Dr. Sonia Schwalen, pediatric psychologist expert and nationally certified school psychologist. We also have a very special guest on the show today. We've got Joseph Lopez joining us from the Next Steps Red Clinic team. And we got a very exciting podcast today. We're going to talk about addiction and what that looks like in the household, kids, parents. We're going to kind of hit on all cylinders. And so definitely want to check this out. There's definitely, there's a lot of kids impacted by alcohol and substance abuse. There's millions of kids that are living in a home with where at least one parent has some type of drug or alcohol abuse problem. And then kids are experimenting. Kids are going to be kids, right? And so we're going to kind of dive deep. Joseph is going to share his story with us as well. But I want to give some stats, as I do a lot of times on these types of podcasts. So between 2016 and 2020, drug use among 8th graders increased 61% in just 4 years. By 12th grade, 62% of all teenagers have abused alcohol. 50% of teenagers have misused a drug at least once. And 43% of college students use illicit drugs. Those are some pretty staggering, phenomenal types of, stats right there, right? Very high percentages.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Joseph Lopez. I am a therapist at the Red Clinic for Next Steps. I have struggled with an eating disorder in the past. I'm currently in recovery. I went to treatment at Shades of Hope in Buffalo Gap, which is also where I later went to work and got my eating disorder training. So I was taught by Tenny McCarty, who is an expert in the field of eating disorders. She's written a book, and she's had many celebrities that have been at Shades of Hope, from Dr. Phil to Dr. Oz. Intervention has done some shows out there. So that's where I was trained at. So I was taught by very, very expert people in the field of eating disorders.
Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah. And so I guess you opened up with a bunch of background, Gene did on just drug use and substance use amongst youth, mm-hmm. right? And today I think you're wanting to share, or you came on to share, thank you for doing that, yes. about just addiction and childhood addiction, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So what do you want to share with us today?
So I was going to ask you, so you mentioned your eating disorder addiction. When did that actually start for you?
Actually, it started very young for me. So when I was young, my mom was really into dieting. Every week that I was growing up, she was on a different diet. And I remember when I was 4 years old, we would sit in the living room and do aerobics together. And even at a very young age, I was taught that what you look like was very important. So we would do aerobics. I had older brothers that had every issue of Muscle and Fitness. So we were always looking at these bodybuilding magazines. And then when I was about 7 or 8, we went to a garage sale and they had a weight bench for sale. And so I ended up buying the weight bench because we got a weekly allowance of like $1 a week. And so I had saved my dollars. And so I bought this weight bench. So even at 8, I was sitting in my backyard lifting weights and looking at the bodybuilding magazines. And, my siblings, my parents, they were always talking about weight and what they look like. So it was very important in our family.
So wait, no pun intended, just kidding. But at age 7, 8 years old, you're buying a weight bench.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
Definitely not the normal toy a kid wants to buy at 7 or 8. So.
No, not at all. So all my friends they were buying baseball cards and Garbage Pail Kids and all those things that the kids grew up with in the 80s, right? So, but not me. I was ready to play football. I was ready to be involved in sports. I played Little Dribblers, which is, basketball when you're in elementary. I played Little League, which is baseball. So, fitness was just a very important part of my life growing up.
Okay, excellent. Well, and you also had mentioned that there's also another story to your addiction that you were going to share. Yes. Tell us what that looks like.
So when I was growing up, alcohol was a big part of my family, right? We had a big Hispanic family, so a lot of drinking, a lot of parties, weddings, quinceañeras. It was every couple months somebody was getting married or having a party, and so alcohol was just a big part of my normal. But when I was 11 years old, between 6th and 7th grade, my buddy says, "Hey, we're gonna buy a 6-pack of beer. Won't you come over and hang out with us?" So I gave him $2. It gave me 2 beers, and I felt like I had arrived. I sat. We were sitting on my best friend's porch, and we were drinking beer. We were talking about what was going to happen in junior high. You know, we were going to talk about dating. We were talking about the football players that we were going to become and how awesome it was going to be. Seventh grade did not turn out to be that awesome, but you know, the beer made it feel like it was going to be great. And that's kind of where my eating disorder kind of took a backseat. So after that, it was kind of how much beer can I get and how often can I get it? Because it makes me feel good. It made me feel like I could talk, like everything was real laid back, and I could dance and I could talk to people. And I didn't feel like I wanted to jump out of my own skin when I started drinking.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So just give you that freedom to be the person you wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without the social fears and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was it was just something that felt really good. What I realize now is I didn't have many coping mechanisms, and there was a lot going on in junior high, right? Your body's changing. You know, you're being compared to older siblings. You know, you're going to this new school across town where you don't know anybody there. And I just didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to talk to people about what was going on, you know, so.
Yeah. So how often did you start drinking through middle school?
So middle school was at least a couple times a month. When I got to freshman, sophomore year, it was every weekend. I grew up in the country. You know, you pay your $5, you get a red cup, and you get to drink at the keg party out in the country field. And every weekend it was binge drinking. And then when I got to college, it was just full on. You know, I failed out of college my sophomore year. You know, my GPA was extremely low because alcohol, I had lost the power of choice. When people said, let's go drink, I didn't realize until I got into recovery that I could actually say no. And those thoughts never crossed my mind. Like, you want to go drink? I might have a test the next day. I might have these important functions with my family. But if somebody said, let's go drink, that's what we're doing.
That's where the fun's at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it was a good way to not grow up, you know, we call it living life on life's terms, right? I didn't want to face reality. I didn't want to grow up. I didn't want to have a car payment or an apartment payment or a house payment. I wanted to party and have fun.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be a lot of the things that we see, you know, in the U.S. especially. You know, we hear about all the college parties and the kids that are, you know, dying from binging and these types of things that happen. But, you know, so you mentioned these parties and whatnot as a middle school and high school kid. So were parents involved in these parties? Did they know about it? Were they there as well? Was it okay to drink?
They were not. You know, mom and dad said, you know what? You don't have a curfew as long as you're not doing anything that involves the law, you know, just be smart. And so, no, you know, we'd get older people in the town to buy us beer, and there was no parents around. It was just, you know, my parents went away for the weekend, so we're drinking at that house. Next weekend, somebody else's parents go away for the weekend, or you know, we lived out in the country, so it's like you just go sit up on a country road, and there'd be nobody out there.
Yeah.
So you start drinking.
Now, did your parents ever know that you were drinking as a kid?
Yeah, because I was not smart. I left bottle caps in my pockets all the time, and you know, I'd ask for money, and I wouldn't have anything to show for it. So yeah, they knew I was drinking. Yeah.
So I mean, ultimately, though, it sounds like they really trusted you because they said, right, no curfew, just don't break the law and stay out of trouble, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. When was it? I mean, I guess at what point, right, did they realize, hey, this is a lot more than just a couple drinks here and there?
I think it was when I was in college, and you know, I got that, you know, my freshman, sophomore year. I guess it was more of my junior year. It's somewhere between my sophomore and junior year that my grades came in, and my GPA was like a 0.89 or something like that. And they were like, "What happened? You know, you were doing so well." And at that time, I really didn't know what was going on. I really didn't. You know, I didn't realize that the drinking was a problem. You know, I just, you know, me and my girlfriend had broken up at the time. You know, I took a job working nights and trying to go to college. So I just kind of left it at that. So I told my parents, you know, I'm coming home for 1 year. I got put on academic suspension. And in that year, I said, okay, when I go back to school, and I still didn't realize that drinking was a problem, I said, I'm not going to drink it until I at least study 3 hours per day, right? So I have the whole day. to get these 3 hours of studying. And I did that exactly that. When I went back in a year, I studied for 3 hours every day. And then I would start drinking as much as I could. So I kind of compensated for it. And I ended up with very high GPAs after that. And so it seemed to work. But once school was over, it's like the drinking started again, all over again. So then I'm in my master's program, and guess what happens again? The pattern is starting to develop, right? I end up getting kicked out of college again for the second time. And then that's when I realized that drinking had been my problem.
So I have a question, because we talk about stages of change a lot to parents whenever they come in and next steps, and we're just helping parents understand, like, hey, where's your kid at in the treatment process? And this is exactly how we're going to meet them where they're at. Sure. And there's a lot of times when the individual themselves, right, doesn't really think there's a problem, has never considered it, right? Yeah. Kind of like what you're describing, absolutely, which we would call pre-contemplation, right? Mm-hmm. And then, but people around them may be saying, like, hey, you really need to look at this, or I can't be around you because of X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. Did you ever get hints like that along the way?
I did not. I think I had one girlfriend in college that had brought it up, but nobody ever told me, because I think it's so ingrained in my culture. This is people drink and men drink, and I just, my parents, I think they were also doing their own thing. I don't think they realized it. I don't think I realized it. This is the thing also, is that when I was growing up, and I don't even know if there used to be these commercials, and it used to be called the SCHIC hotline, like SCHIC, like SCHICK, I think is how it was spelled. They said, if you have a problem with alcohol, this is what it looks like. And so they had people that were dressed like y'all, right? People in business suits, right? So my version of what alcoholics looked like was these high finance business people that worked on Wall Street, not the people of what I know what alcoholics like today, right? Doctors, lawyers, concrete workers, therapists. Anybody, right? But in my mind, I had an image of what alcoholics look like, right? And it was not me.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of want to back up a little bit too, because I know when I was in high school, I lived in Jersey, and we get down to the Jersey Shore, and they had keg parties, and it didn't matter how old you were. I'm 16 years old going down the Jersey Shore, and if I wanted to indulge in drinking, I could do it very easily. But there's also, so many people incorporate drinking with a good time. Like, you can't go anywhere without having a drink, right? I mean, even in today's society, you go to the zoo to take your kids and they're serving alcohol. In fact, there's a lot of parents who don't like to go anywhere that's recreational with their family if they don't serve alcohol at that venue, right? So everything's involved, involves drinking to some degree. And there's a lot of parents that actually think that, okay, well, maybe drinking's not so bad as long as you're doing it in a healthy way. If you're doing it in a safe way, it may be against the law, but is it really against the law? I mean, so it's okay if you drink at home. If you have friends over, there are parent clusters that, all the kids are friends and whatnot. And as long as they're at one person's house drinking and somebody's there, it's supervised some degree, somewhat, then it's okay. And we could even talk about drugs too. I mean, there's a lot of parents that they think smoking marijuana is okay. This is even before, the legalization started happening across America. I mean, you can go back 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, and man, it's not so bad. I mean, I smoked marijuana the whole time I was in high school, and I got my college degree, and I'm successful, and look, I'm good, right? Mm-hmm. Parents have that mentality a lot of times to where it's not so bad, it's okay. And then what happens, things can actually, get out of control pretty quick. So there's a lot of that enabling behavior too, as well. So
absolutely. And that's the one thing that I didn't realize, that my parents enabled me. So in my addiction, they say the age you start your addiction, when I was 11, you stop aging emotionally. So I lived most of my late teens, early 20s, late 20s as a junior high kid. And I didn't want to take responsibility for anything. So my parents, I'd make this little financial mess here and they'd clean it up. I'd run out of money before payday, and I'd say, hey, Mom and Dad, can I borrow $100 until payday? And they'd give it to me. And it wasn't, and I didn't realize that they were enabling me at that time. I can see it very clearly now, but they never set clear boundaries with, no, you made this mess, we're going to let you take care of it. Right. So, because they really didn't know what the problem was. They didn't know what alcoholism looks like. I don't know that they fully even understand what eating disorders look like. So yeah, it's and I try to educate them as much as I can, and kind of the reason why I started drinking and this eating disorder and stuff like that. So.
Well, there's even, I know kids whose parents will, even if they get into some legal issues because of abuse, they're going to try to bail them out and help them get out of it. And, I understand that. I'm a parent too. I'd want to help my kid too and whatnot. But there's going to be a time at some point we have to determine whether or not are we enabling or are we going to, really find them the help they need to stop the patterns, right?
Absolutely. And with most addictions, you have to hit rock bottom, which means I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And you could be keeping that person from hitting that rock bottom by enabling them. The people that taught me and said, you love your kid. You are loving them. You're loving them to death. It's basically what you're doing by enabling them. You're loving them so much that you're keeping them from getting the consequences of their actions, which that some addicts do need to reach.
Yeah. I've got a really good friend when we were in college. His younger brother was in high school, and he had a really bad drug problem, and my friend didn't really know until it got really, really bad, because he'd come around and whatnot. It's okay. So he would, hang out and he'd party at the parties and whatnot every now and then, very rarely, but he did come around. But come to find out, just as a high school kid, he ended up leaving home a lot of times from his parents' house. He would steal from his parents like crazy. He'd even steal furniture and go sell it for drugs, and then they'd find him, days later at a crack house or somewhere, and have to go pick him up, and they enabled him a lot. And I could see that as even a college kid. I saw the enabling. I'm like, wow, that's man, how do you? I know you love them so much, but just as you said, you loved them to death, and they kept, enabling for a very, very long time until they did finally, several years later, put their hands up and said, hey, you know what, we can't continue doing this. But so let's talk about what it really looks like. How can we notice some signs, if there are signs, for parents with kids, and then also once we notice those signs, what are some really proper steps to take? To really make sure we're not loving our kids to death.
Absolutely. And I think, some of those signs are, am I having to save you a lot? Are you not taking responsibility for a lot of areas in your life, in education and finance and these things? And it's having that conversation, having that open and honest conversations. I never felt comfortable talking to my parents about anything. I don't know that I still do. We talk about news, sports, and weather. But really talking to your children about what's going on. Are you struggling in this area? What's wrong? Have you become a different person than you were just a couple months ago? Is the preoccupation with food, with body image, with alcohol? Why do you need all this money all of a sudden? But I think it's just really having that open dialogue and kids being very comfortable to come up and talk to their parents, because eating disorders, alcohol, it's all about deeper issues. It's about the things that I don't want to talk about. And I'm using this unhealthy coping mechanism to deal with other things. And that's hard to talk about.
Well, and I think there's a lot of times too where, those deeper issues can be, am I accepted at school? Do I have friends? Who's my friend circle? I don't really have any friends, and I find these friends and I want to fit in with this group over here. And these are the things they're doing. And so you do it, but you're welcomed in. It's kind of like a gang, right? Initiation and whatnot. And that's where you find, or you feel like you can actually be yourself, because you really don't even know how to cope with the things that are really underneath.
Exactly, because I don't know who I am. Who am I? I tell people I was a mixture of 3 people from Saved by the Bell and 2 of the Popular Kids when I was in high school, because I just didn't know who I was. But, stepping back a little bit, being able to talk to your parents, I think it's very important for your parents to talk to their kids about red flags. What does that look like when you're choosing friends, when you're choosing a boyfriend or a girlfriend? What are these things that I should look out for when picking these people? And I don't know that my parents ever taught me any of that. And so I have that conversation a lot with my Red Clinic clients. What do your friends look like? Are they bringing you down? Are they healthy friends? And, how would you know how to identify a healthy friend or a healthy boyfriend, a healthy girlfriend, a And I tell the parents the same things, you know, and then it goes back to values, you know, what values are you setting for your children? You know, what are you showing is important? The values in my home were that you look good out in public and you keep everything that happens behind closed doors. And as long as your physical appearance looks great, then everything's going to be great. And it just wasn't.
Yeah. It's like the old Andre Agassi commercials, you know, image is everything, right?
Yeah.
The Minolta or Canon or whatever it was.
Yeah.
You know, that's, I'm glad you said that. I mean, that's one conversation I have with our older son all the time about relationships with girls is, you know, you really need to figure out what qualities do you want in a girlfriend? What qualities do you absolutely not want? Which ones can you be flexible on a little bit? And as you're getting to know somebody, but that can be it could be just a friend, it could be a girlfriend, it could be a boyfriend, it could be any relationship. We really should really define those areas, right? But I was never taught that either. Most people aren't taught that. I learned it the hard way, going through relationships and whatnot. And, you know, luckily God blessed me with a beautiful wife and she's got lots of grace for me. But, you know, if I had learned these types of things, man, my life would be a whole lot different right now, you know, and we just don't teach our kids that, you know, what is important, what's not important. Let's define those things. Yeah. Let's use those to really kind of grade where we're at.
Absolutely. And I think some parents don't even know what their morals and values are. You know, what is important to me? What is my sense of right and wrong? Is it giving my kid a beer? Is it enabling them on their eating disorder? We're both struggling with what we look like. Let's go run together, you know, which is not healthy at all. So what am I teaching my child? You know, I have to look at what is important to me.
Yeah. Well, I got two experts here. So one question I want to ask, and I think a lot of parents always ask or want to ask or want the answer to is, you know, and I thought about it. Luckily, my 18-year-old, he never really cared to really go out in the social scene and party in high school and whatnot. He pretty much, you know, had a couple of friends, stayed home a lot. They didn't really just do a whole lot of, you know, party and things like that. So we just never had that. But the question was always there. I just never had to actually ask myself, but it was there. You know, what do I do? Do I allow my kid to have a drink? Do I give them a drink? Do I say, no, you can't do that and restrict it so much to where they want to have that drink? Because if I make it to where it's a big no, you know, they're going to find a way to do it if they want to do it anyway and hide it, or they get to college and all of a sudden they do have access to it now, and all of a sudden it's brand new and they're just going to hit the hills and go have fun. I mean, so how do we really kind of address that internally? I know morals, values and things, but that's a pretty big question parents have. Should I let them, you know, try it and here and there and experiment a little bit? At least they're at home doing it before going off to college and having it all brought up into them whenever they want it.
Mm-hmm. So what I tell people is, what's your motive? So my sponsor, every time I have a great idea, I say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. You know, I'm going to buy my girlfriend flowers, right? And he's like, what's your motive? You know, oh, I want her to be okay with us buying that 50-inch TV or 75-inch, right? And he's like, did you ever think about that? And I said, no, I didn't even realize that. And so, you know, what's your motive behind drinking? Is it because your friends are doing it? Is it because you're running away from something? And then also, once you start drinking, there's a big difference between alcoholism and social drinking, right? People that love themselves do not drink alcoholically. You know, I drank to drown my problems, but my problems could swim. There wasn't enough alcohol in this world to drown my problems. You know, it's just having that conversation. Why do you want to drink? Is it the peer pressure? Is it all those things? And figuring out the motive. And then that goes back to having that open and honest conversation with your children. You know, is alcohol bad? No, it's in moderation. It goes back to that balance. It's all in balance, right? It's when you're drinking or thinking about drinking more than you should. You know, alcoholics, eating disorder patients, they think about their substance 90% of the day. When I was in eating disorder, in my active addiction, I was thinking about exercise and food 90% of the time. When I was drinking alcoholically, I was thinking about alcohol 90% of the time. That balance was way off. Yeah. So it's just having that open and honest conversation.
Other things we can do as parents to maybe help our kids understand, you know, addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating habits, you know, like the way to educate them. Because again, you know, if we try to keep them from it, you know, they're going to be exposed to it at some point in time, right? So how do we educate our kids?
So I like what you said about what's your motive is kind of like your first question, because I think that's the exact same question parents should be asking themselves, right? If they're thinking about, I mean, I'll ask you too, if they're thinking about introducing alcohol to their child, right? And they're justifying it in ways of, well, at least it's a controlled environment here at home, or I've even heard we can understand what your tolerance is before you get to college so that you don't tip over in an unsafe environment while you're drinking for the first time in that environment or whatever it may be. Is it appropriate for parents to also start asking themselves, what's our motive? Why are we trying to get our kid to start drinking right now?
Absolutely. Am I trying to control the situation that I'm totally finding uncontrollable?
Yeah.
Or do I let it play out the way it's supposed to? Do I have faith that I've instilled values and morals in my kid that they're going to make great decisions? And just sitting down and say, is alcohol bad? No. Can some things happen from alcoholically drinking, or it's going to impair your judgment?
Yeah.
That's very dangerous. You can be put in very dangerous situations. Is this something you want? I'm all about you having fun at college. I don't want you to get hurt. It's what I tell my patients in session every day. I'm bringing this up because these things will hurt you. I want to make sure that you're going to come back to our session. Eating disorders, depression, anxiety, addiction, all those things, they hurt people. Alcohol hurts people. And I don't want to see you get hurt by these things when I can tell you the signs to look for or the motive of why you're doing these things, right? So,
and I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said, can parents trust that they've prepared their child, right, to be in those situations? So what values and morals have you been instilling in your child all along? How have you been parenting them with intention? Because there is going to be a day and many, many circumstances in which your child is not always going to have you right there.
Yeah, you're not going to have that angel on your shoulder, right?
Right. And I always tell parents, I actually tell my teenagers this when they come to session, and they'll say something like, I went on a date and I could hear my mom's voice like the whole time telling me that I should, my friends should know exactly where I'm at, and I should have a secret text that I can message out if I need to get out of the situation, and I knew where the exits were. And I'm like, you heard your mom's voice in your head the whole time, right? And that's a sign of, hey, even though your kid may act exasperated and totally overwhelmed by your parenting, that you've done a good job, right? Like pat yourself on the back, because when you're not with them, they can remember the things you taught them, and then they use those lessons to actually make decisions in the moment when it counts.
Yeah, and kids, if you hear your mom's voice, the whole time you're on a date, you're probably on the wrong day. You probably need to go ahead and leave. Otherwise, it's probably not going to be like that. But growing up as a kid, I remember these commercials so like vividly. The frying pan with the egg. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? All these things that they try to instill into kids, and kids don't really respond to those very well either, right? But I do love the fact about, the values. Kids are going to experiment when they, come across different situations. It's all about the choices they make and having those conversations with them.
Before we started this episode, I'd asked you, when you tell your story, is it just going to be about alcohol, or is there any other substance? And your response was, well, I was kind of a straight narrow kid. I couldn't get myself to like go beyond alcohol.
yes.
Right. So there's even a part of you that was definitely discerning enough, right? There was a point to what you became uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So, just with a lot of eating disorder patients, perfectionism was everything. The way I looked, I had to be perfect. And to me, drugs was not the perfect image that I was willing to portray. Now, do people drink? Yeah. You see the beer commercial and the guy's like running across the beach with a beer in his hand. Yeah, I could get on board with that, but you never see a person that's hit rock bottom in drugs looking aesthetically appealing. I guess that would be the word.
Well, the beer commercials too. I mean, you have the world's most distinguished man,
Yes, absolutely. Right. Yeah.
Right.
The beer that I choose, depends on what I want to portray to people. Right. So yeah, even then I knew that, and even when I drank, I was looking at the calories. I was looking, okay, I can drink this much, but I'm also going to work out, this much to burn off those calories. So Yeah, it was always there.
You know, growing up, my the way my parents try to, or my dad, I should say, even more so, he tried to teach me about addiction, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. If I ever catch you smoking, I'm going to lock you in a closet and give you 10 packs and make you smoke them all until you get out. I said, why is that?
Sounds just like your dad.
He's like, I was like, why is that, Dad? You know, and he's like, because after you smoke 10 packs, you'll never want one again in your life.
Yes.
See, that's one way of parenting.
And it never
would not
works because guess what? I smoked for a period of time, and then you want to give your kid some exposure to alcohol. Give him a big shot of the strongest whiskey you have, and once he takes a shot of that, they're not going to want anything else, right?
Yeah.
But again, how long does that last for?
Yeah. And the thing is, what I've come to realize, and you hear it a lot in addiction circles, is it wasn't the 12th drink. It wasn't the 17th. It was the 18th. It was the first one. It was the first drink that set me off on that compulsion, on that road. And as long as I don't put that first one in me, that craving doesn't kick off. It's like when I first got into eating disorder recovery, as long as I don't skip a meal or I don't over exercise, right? Because it wasn't the 5th hour of exercise that hurt me. It was when I decided that I was going to use this unhealthy coping mechanism and I was going to go run at the track for 4 hours or whatnot. If I could just call somebody, call next steps and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, and proper therapy steps in, or I call my sponsor and they say, let's talk about this. What's your motive? Why are you trying to run away? What's going on? So it's never about the 17th or 18th beer. It's the first one. If I can stay away from that first one, I've got a chance.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and I think for parents, I mean, alcohol, drug use, addiction is so prevalent these days. It always has been, but more so now. You can actually get in more trouble. I know back in the day, the circumstances or the consequences, I should say, are not nearly as bad as they are today. But there's some pretty bad circumstances and outcomes that can happen. So it just comes down to, again, just, educating our kids, having that open conversation. And I think even more so having that just that a home to where kids can actually feel comfortable coming to you as a parent, talking to you. Hey, I tried this. How am I going to respond to my kid when they say, hey, I tried marijuana, I tried, alcohol, I tried this, or, whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I thought of when you said, the parent setting the morals and the values for the kids, a lot of parents, I think, try to catch up on 18 years of parenting the month before kids go to college. And it's like, it's too late at that point, it needs to start at a decent age, talking about what's going on and what's important and setting that standard in the home,
Yeah. Well, am I trying to be friends with my kid also?
Yes.
I want to be the cool parent, all these things that we do as parents sometimes. We have to really look in the mirror and see who we are as a parent and really, what kind of parent do we want to be? So
Absolutely.
I love, again, just going back to, loving your kid to death. That could be a very negative, thing that can happen. So
Absolutely.
Very bad path to go down.
So I have a question. You kind of took us up to sophomore year and then coming home for a year, going to master's, dropping out again.
Yeah.
Right. So then what happened?
So in my master's program, I was asked to write a paper because my master's is in social work. So they said, you're going to be working with populations that you may not feel very comfortable in. And they gave us a list, and I don't remember what was on that list, but I remember one place said Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I said, I'll write the paper about that. So I remembered I went to the parking lot. I had a 6-pack of beer. I drank the 6-pack in the parking lot. I went inside. I got the Desire chip, right? And I said, hey, I'm Joseph. I'm an alcoholic, right? And I remember there was something different about those people. They looked you in the eye when they talked to you, and they really said, keep coming back. They're like, if you really want to quit drinking and you want a different life, keep coming back. And you don't have to do this alone. And that stuck in the back of my head, and it was really weird and uncomfortable because nobody had ever told me that before. I never felt that anywhere. And so I went and wrote the paper, and then a year later, when I got kicked out of college and things weren't going right and I quit my job, it was like I was beating down the door to come back. It was like, we always say God was doing for me what I could not do for myself, right? So it was like he showed me this opportunity or this door that said, you're going to need this later on if you're willing to notice it. And so I went back and I said, I think I'm struggling with this alcoholism, and and I got a sponsor, and things started to get better, and I didn't realize that. And my sponsor goes, you don't ever have to drink again if you don't want to. And that thought had never crossed my mind, never, not once. And I remember the first time I went home, my family was like, "You want to drink?" And I was like, "No." And they said, "Okay." And then they moved on, and it was no big deal. So the only, which is not even a downside, when I quit drinking though, I lost, I think it was right around 37 pounds the first month. So my eating disorder came back with a vengeance. So a year into my alcohol recovery, that's when I went to treatment for anorexia, because it just really came back, and I was restricting. I was eating 600 calories a day, and I was working out all the time, and life was good. There's just that missing piece. So I ended up going to treatment about a month after I got my 1 year AA chip. So.
Okay, so I just want to back up. So thank you for sharing all that.
Sure.
But I heard you say that you went to an AA meeting to write a paper for a class, and you drank a 6-pack before you walked in.
I did, yeah.
You had to have the courage to go in there, man.
Yeah, I wanted to play the part.
Okay.
I wanted them to think that I was an alcoholic. Now,
Wowee.
So,
So you didn't really have a clue what you were walking into.
I
like
didn't.
It wasn't, the only reason you went there was for a class project. Essentially, you didn't think for a second, this could apply to me, or I'm going into this meeting
not even
after drinking 6 beers, and that may not be okay. Like none of those thoughts went through your mind.
Because what I know now is that people that drink don't come to AA meetings. I've never seen a drunk person in an AA meeting.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know what I was walking into. I just wanted to write the paper. I wanted a good grade. It was my first year of my master's program. So yeah.
So the good thing is that there's always hope, even for our kids. I know there's a lot of parents out there that have kids that are going through the addiction now. It doesn't look good. There's not a whole lot of hope and faith and whatnot, but there is hope. And yours was a long period of time, right? But that's for a lot of people. So I guess one question for parents who have kids, loved ones, and it could be a 5-year-old kid, an 18-year-old kid, or a 35-year-old kid going through addiction currently. Because you mentioned through your whole entire addiction, you were still at 11, 12-year-old maturity level because all you cared about was drinking. Yeah. You hadn't matured yet because you didn't want to, didn't need to, and your parents enabled you in that way. What are some things parents can do, loved ones can do to really get some support and guidance and whatnot? If my kid's going through an addiction, I don't really know how to talk to them. I don't know how to love on them the right way. I don't know how to encourage them. I don't know how to continue to try to guide them as much as I can. What can I do to get help for myself to be supportive for them?
So number one is the first thing I would do is call Next Steps, because we do provide great therapy, is to talk about what's going on, to get it out of you. I can only offer what I have. And if I have a kid that has an addiction, that's struggling with an eating disorder, and I have no idea what that even looks like, then I might want to do some research on it. You've heard of Al-Anon. Al-Anon is for the spouses, the families of people with alcohol addiction. So you're in a support group with other people that are dealing with a family member that has alcohol. So you've got tons of support there. This is what alcoholics do, and this is how you set boundaries. There's codependency books that are out there. Facing Codependency by Pia Melody is an amazing book. But it's just getting educated and learning what supporting the person in addiction looks like versus enabling, right? And it's about talking about what's going on, because I think parents, the first thing they think is, what did I do wrong? Where could I have done different?
Yep.
And we can look at the past, but what can I do moving forward, starting today? And the quicker I start on that, the better chance that I have. And I think therapy is just very, very important for parents that are dealing with that, because they can come and be open and honest, because they may not know who to turn to.
Yep. Well, for a lot of parents, they don't want to turn to friends or even other family members because they don't want the judgment, the shame.
The shame, the guilt, the stigma. Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Dr. Schwalen, do you have anything else you want to close with?
Well, before we decided on kind of where this episode was going to go, we talked about how, Joseph does have an eating disorder recovery story also. Mm-hmm. And so to hear more about that, we will absolutely be covering that on the Red Clinic podcast. So tune in there. But before we end this episode, what would you like parents to know about recovery? Right? Is it a straight road? Is it a jagged edged road? I mean, what can they expect? And
So recovery looks different for everybody. There is no set program for recovery. It's going to look different for every family member because every addiction, every eating disorder is different. Every child is different. And so the thing is, what I tell people is to take it one day at a time. Keep it simple. Don't try to take, oh, my kid needs to recover by this set time, because it's more than likely not going to happen. So it's, what can I do today? One of the best things to do is not to be in denial, and fixing any problem is to admit you have the problem. So the quicker you admit to it, it's like, okay, let's get the tools that we need to help our kid with addiction or eating disorder.
Yeah.
So parents really go through a process of admitting that their child has a problem also.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
I want to speak to that really quick, because that made me think of my own brother through high school had a really severe drug addiction. And we didn't really know as a family how bad it really was. We thought it was just the marijuana, and he, experimented with some other things here and there. And he had a full blown out heroin addiction. And he went to kind of a drug rehab state program through the jail system called Safe P here in Texas. And then once you get out of Safe P after so many months, you go into a rehab. What do you call it?
It's like a halfway house.
Halfway house, there you go. And he actually failed the halfway house, and he had to go back to jail. And luckily, because he was so young, they let him go back through Safe P one more time, which is not a very common thing. It does happen, but his path was, it took a couple of serious, really huge times to where he was facing, a long, long time at the state penitentiary as a 17-year-old kid. And I remember well before all this happened, though, probably a year and a half, 2 years before this all legal stuff happened, my dad took him to a treatment center, inpatient. And again, he had told us that it was only marijuana and this and that. And when he got to the inpatient treatment center, where he was going to be living at for a period of time, he was calling every week, this is not for me. And these people here have true, huge addict problems and whatnot. And, every time we'd go visit on the weekends and do the family stuff, and they would do the parent stuff, he would just really just emotionally, I guess, make them feel terrible. Mm-hmm. And after like 4 or 5 weeks, of course, my mom and dad, he pulled on my mom's heartstrings, and then they pulled him out. And because they did that, it got worse, as you mentioned, hit rock bottom. So I think that's something for parents to also understand too. I mean, your kids, when you're in addiction or in your addiction, you're going to make it sound like there's nothing wrong, right? I mean, when parents come to you, or somebody, loved ones, doesn't matter who it is, comes to you and says, hey man, we need an intervention. We need to step in. We need to help you. The addict is most likely, unless they're really at rock bottom, is most likely going to say what?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't have one. No, I don't have a problem, and that's one of the things that I like to talk about with the parents is that, eating disorder patients, addicts, they're very manipulative because they want to get the fix. They want what they want when they want it. Right. And so a lot of times, so eating disorders, of course, are also about secrets and hiding things. Right. So the eating disorder kid will, the dad will make the lunch, or you're going to do this. And then the eating disorder patient will say, oh, mom, you're going to let that happen? And guess what? They're just sitting back, and mom and dad are bickering back and forth. And as long as I'm taking the focus off of me and you guys are arguing, I can do whatever I want. I can throw my sandwich in the trash. I can hide my cheese stick in my pocket, right? So eating disorder patients are very manipulative. They know how to get what they want from their parents, and they will play their parents against each other. And, the parents need to have the united front, just like the treatment team needs to have the united front. Our standard is recovery, and we're not going to enable you. We're not going to tell you things of what you want to hear, but we're going to tell you in a very loving, compassionate, empathetic way, what you're doing is not working, and it could have severe consequences.
Absolutely. And that's the importance of really parents finding a support system, whatever it is, whether it's next steps in therapy and getting some help there or whatever it may be, just getting that support and be able to communicate and talk and really get some guidance. 'Cause as a parent, it's hard to make those decisions sometimes when you're in it, and this is your loved one, this is your baby, it's really, it can be really, really tough. So, all right. Anything else you guys want to close with before we end today? Joseph, it was a pleasure having you on the show, just hearing your story. It gives us all hope, for those who have loved ones with addictions and whatnot, and that it can happen to anybody, right? Anyone, there's no discrimination whatsoever. So thank you again for joining the Parents of Advocate podcast, From Surviving to Thriving in Your Household, and we will see you next week.